Hi, everyone. Welcome to Snack Break. I am Ren with Source, and I'm so excited to see you all. Before we get started, I'll tell you a couple things about the webinar tool. So you're all muted automatically, but you have access to the live chat there on the right. You can pop in an emoji to try it out or say hi. I see you're all already doing that. You can also use the live chat to ask any questions or comment, and we'll be sure we answer any of the questions you have. So bring it on. We love that. The more conversational, the better. And we're also going to send you a recording of the webinar after this presentation ends, so you can check it out later or send it to a friend or reference it later. So I'm really excited to announce our guest today. It's Geoff with Pure and Freeform. Hey, Geoff.
Hello.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Pure and Freeform for those of us who are new to this?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm an architect, and I started designing metal after working briefly at Ralph Lauren. I was really interested in materiality, and I saw that there was like this lack of ability to really contextualize materials, especially within metals. So I was looking for different ways to kind of bring more interest visually to metal surfaces, especially. So I started working with a Japanese company to help work with these surfaces, and there wasn't systems for it. So then eventually I met this guy, Will Pilkington, who is an awesome guy, excellent in terms of operations, but understood how to really source things separately. But I call it more of like an Uber method, right? If you have a factory and you have specific things that you produce into the market, you're kind of limited. Whereas if you have a really cool design and then you can subcontract it through really special ways, through perforations, through Arctura, or really cool metalwork for Zaner, all these things then can come together on a project and allows you to really contextualize things.
Awesome. So you really offer a way for designers to create something kind of custom, and you harness the sort of power of many different fabricators. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yep, exactly. And I just think, the market in general, right? I mean, we look at how things are going to change drastically physically right now. And so having kind of a generic base of materiality or like standard things that are dictated only through trend through large manufacturers just seem to be a huge limitation to the designers.
Amen. So can you talk to us a little bit about your new collection and what it does? And can you also talk a little bit about the ways designers can use it?
Sure. So, I mean, I would say, like any metal, this is super easy to fabricate. So, it can go from like millwork to, exterior cladding. So, Portland Canopy and Expensify, two projects in Portland, exhibit, two different finishes. One is a really tight corrugation, one's an interior face fasten panel. But I think the real idea, with these different textures too, is because there's such an ease of formability and you can turn them into so many different shapes, it really comes down to the surface and how that can help to, offer and some kind of semiotic understanding of the project. And I think that's the really big thing that I saw missing recently, and that's a good segue into the collection. So the difference with Specular from, previous collections and, previous metalwork in general is that you always had like, really super high-end materials, like natural materials that have patinization that could be difficult to work with, or if you have a Corten, it could like, drip onto the building, or, super expensive. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have like two-coat Kynar or, HPL finishes or something else that probably can't tell the narrative exactly as you want in terms of the project. And with the influx of construction and, the physical world changing, kind of the need to do site-specific work is really important. So the big difference with this is that previously, I think faux or artificial materials are always like kind of frowned upon because they weren't super attractive. And what they lacked is really the ability to celebrate light. And I think, from a metal standpoint, light is really largely misunderstood and not utilized as much, especially for exteriors. And the reason is because if you have paint, you have like a one gloss level that's probably going to be slightly reflective, and that's your limitation. So with Spectral, this is a full project we're working on you can kind of see it, yeah, in Toronto right now. So this is essentially like a metal frit. So you can see like there's a physical texture and then a higher gloss on there. So you get some reflectivity, right? And then you also have a matte texture. But what you get is a more diffuse surface. So, previously, if you have a surface, it's only one gloss level. Now you can work with different gloss levels, and therefore you can get a nice even spread of light. if you look at the pictures, there's like this vertical one, that's a project in Sacramento, state project, but it's essentially, you know, like this really large vertical pattern that varies between gloss and matte, but you can see, you know, the reflection from far away, and then it's kind of an overlay that mutes that. So it's a different way to look at things, but you know, we've had a lot of interest in that for elevators too, because it's a super durable finish.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about like, what does the design process look like between you and designers? Are there like, do you start with the type of metal? Do you start with an inspiration image? Do you start with what you're trying to achieve? Like, can you walk us through a little bit like how a designer would use you on a project?
Sure. Yeah, so it's actually really interesting because I think when we first started, we kind of wanted to, you know, put the decision of the designs largely into architects and interior designers. And, you know, obviously, first of all, there's not enough time, you know, to really go through the process and understand the materiality. But also, I think, you know, until you really work closely with the material, it's difficult to understand the limitations and what's possible. So I think a big thing, you know, that limits really cool artificial materials in the market, which, you know, in a lot of ways offer a lot of benefits in terms of design, but also sustainability sometimes, is that you really need to understand how the different surfaces work with certain lights. And that's when we started designing stuff in-house, because you can't really understand something until it's physically available, right? You can like talk about it or show pictures, but until someone can handle it or look at the manuscript, you know, it's just not real. So that kind of released a lot of the first collections. And then from those, we have a lot of people designing off those. So what we do is try to create things that we think are relevant, interesting, and kind of exhibit some new technologies or finishes or, you know, just general interest. And then from that, if it works for a collection, that's great. But for like Expensify, you know, we got a physical piece of brass from ZGF that we did, you know, 20 different matches to until we dialed in, you know, the exact right finish. So yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of design in the process, and typically the custom work takes about 3 weeks. And then there are lots of revisions depending on how, you know, big part of the metal is in the project. But there's no upcharge for customization either, which is a really important point, and that allows kind of this freedom to really design.
Great. You work with all types of metal?
Mainly, so there's a big push for sustainability within the company, and that also means, you know, kind of this niche between, you know, those like really beautiful natural materials and, you know, like two-coat solid Kynar. And so in that space, you know, I think one of the things we really try to do is give things that don't have any legacy of maintenance that, you know, like Japanese gardens pictured here, right? So we have a great relationship with Kengo Kuma, and this originally started out as enamel coated steel out of Japan. And the issue was it was like super beautiful, but it was steel, it was super heavy, and all the maintenance from the Japanese gardens is done on the roof. So like when you're working with the green roof, which is another Japanese product called Green Biz, you basically, you know, need to repair it from the roof, so you need to stand on it. The steel, you know, was difficult to repair since it was an artisan, super expensive, but also you can never replicate the same finish after a longer period of time. So this became, you know, a digital version of the analog, but it's the performance that I think was super important, as well as if you look at it, you know, it's really a softer material, it looks like a slate or a stone rather than metal. And I think that's another great point too, where, you know, by using a super matte surface and getting it more diffuse, you know, you can look at metal in different ways than just being purely luminous or, you know, industrial or whatever else.
Yeah, you can really play with the texture of it, is what I'm hearing. And the texture of your building, the space you're trying to create.
Totally. Yeah. And you know, you're getting soil and everything else, but the point is that this still has a warranty, right? It's still a fluoropolymer. It's still AMA 2605 tested, which is like the highest performing resins, you know, in the world.
Awesome. I also love the sustainability talk there. I see this is a redless-free product, VOC, and 100% recyclable. So this can really become a part of the circular economy, which is something I think we're all going to start talking about more these days. I love that. So designers, I know we have a couple designers on the line who are redless-free companies. So use you guys. That's great. The next slide, can you talk a little bit about like all the various ways you guys can use this product? Because I went on your website and you can do, like, the sky is the limit kind of.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think, and that's what makes it super confusing with the finishes and also the systems. I did want to touch on sustainability though, because I think like it's a big frustration for me in general in the market. So before Freeform, I was designing for a bunch of other like larger metal companies, some, from Europe and a bunch in the US. But first of all of them are system centric, meaning, their IP is in the system, so they don't really care about the finish. And the second thing is that most of them use like composite metal. And I know this is like a big, thing people don't want to talk about in the industry, but like when we talk about like processing of our food or like other things like that, I mean, it's obviously super important to have a small life cycle, but also small carbon footprint. Aluminum does have a large carbon footprint for how it's, initially processed. But then after that, if it's single skin, you basically are finishing it and then fabricating it and installing it. Whereas like, composite material, which makes up 95% of the metal market, is, either has some type of polyester core or plastic, or, it's claimed to be recyclable, but it's not. But the point is, as we're moving to like a more of a clean economy, especially after this kind of like reset and pause, I think that to have things that are 100% recyclable, that are red list free, that are VOC free, that go through really kind of just simple finishing is really essential. And so the idea is, instead of making all these tiers of products where, you have an upcharge for this, and in the end, gets VE'd out to something more simple, everything is red list free, everything is single skin, everything is 100% recyclable, everything has recycled content. So they all carry the same traits, so that, when you're using it, you're kind of committed to the shared future of sustainability.
It also a circular economy. Sorry, our sound.
100%. Yeah, no, exactly.
When it comes to taking it down after the end of its life, if it all is sort of this baseline, single skin, same finish, it makes it easier on a project. At the end of its life cycle, you can really recycle it, because it doesn't take rocket science to understand this product. Exactly. You have to do this with, this you have to do this with. You just take it all down and off you go. I mean, metal really can be, if you treat it that way, can be pretty great at reutilizing. Do you take any of your stuff back, or how do you guys do that recycle process?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's because of the kind of complexity of the supply chain, whether it's like, fabricating stuff in-house or selling sheets to a local manufacturer. Like Canopy was done by Skyline locally in Portland. Cops are out. But Handsit did the Expensify, just face fastening. But so like in certain situations like that, when it's a sheet sale, we can't really dictate which happens with waste. But for when we're fabricating, every sample and every every piece of waste goes into sample production or gets recycled.
Oh, fabulous. I love that. So can we talk about where it can all go?
Yeah, totally.
This great product. Yeah.
So, super flexible. So I think, the most common applications are going to be, type of exterior rain screen system. And that ranges from, really premium large plate panel systems. So the kind of combination slab spandrel project on the top is 108 chambers in Tribeca. So that's obviously more complex, right? You have a lot of different kind of shapes and tapered effects there. And then below, bottom left is with the black and steel is 25 Kent. So that's going to be more traditional plate panels. This is pretty cool because it's like this new kind of interpretation of a black and steel, and it moves from, the exterior to the interior lobby. It has a kind of a visual optical effect on it. So when the light hits it, you see this secondary texture. So it has a more intimate, feel than traditional, industrial black and steel. And then the right one is the ARIA Convention Center in Vegas. But I think, like you said, there's one of the kind of difficult things to do is really define exactly what we do. I mean, we've worked on airports, and we did a ceiling at Squarespace headquarters that was a custom textured black that was 800 square feet. So I think the range of, what can be done is huge, and that's what can be a little bit daunting or difficult to understand at times. But basically, the simple answer is anything you can do with metal, you can do with this, with the exception of extrusion. And that's because the way basically the pigment and the resin and the inks are adhered to the surface, it needs to be on a very flat surface for the right dispersion of ink. and that can't be done on a formed piece, essentially. But acoustical ceilings, signage and millwork, we do tons and tons of millwork. There's a lot of stock material as well, ranging from blackened steels to brass to Corten.
Awesome. So for a project on the interior, like the top one there, is that something that the designer would work with you to help fabricate, or do you sort of coordinate with a local fabricator, or is it a mix of both? Like in terms of specifying, what should a designer draw on their details? Are they going to have to help? Are you going to help to put this in the drawing somehow, or live in the specs, or where does it live?
Sure. Yeah, that's an awesome question, because I think it really helps get the price to where it should be. So, a lot of times people just look at us as a kind of a, design studio focusing on metal, whereas we do have, full fabrication that goes to, up to shop drawings. So ostensibly the best, direction is to work with us to develop the system, because that would allow for like optimization, minimization of waste and realistic pricing. And then once all that's established, if there's an installer like on Canopy that's local, that can put a package together that's better price point and allows it to be locally sourced, then it can go in that direction. But the establishing the price point from Pure Freeform is much better, because then it establishes the baseline, and then there's no gray area in terms of pricing. I think what happens other times is if you get in late to a project, we're throwing a number into the abyss, and we had a millwork project at Amazon where our sheet was like $15, and NBBJ called and said like your material is $700 a square foot, and it's just like because got marked up down the line and someone didn't want to use it, and there's no real kind of integrity check sometimes on the process. So that's one really important thing. But with 108 Chambers that you asked about, Wood Spaggett, they're awesome. It's their New York office that designed it. This guy Keith Saglioka, really good designer. And he basically detailed everything, but in this case, it was just a sheet sale to a local fabricator installer.
So what are in terms of leadless free, recyclable, low VOC, and you will help with the pricing so that there's transparency in how much something should cost, which incentivizes a designer to use a new material. Because one of the things I know designers really struggle with is if they want to use a new material, sometimes the contractor is reluctant to try something new.
Exactly, yeah.
So you can work with a contractor to sort of blend it between doing something really innovative on your end and then working with a local fabricator to really push the envelope. Is that how it works?
Totally. So, I mean, actually, that's why I was kind of saying that. I felt like until, Will really looked at this from a manufacturing standpoint, it just was not as successful, because you can push awesome finishes as much as you want, but until you're able to really accurately, give pricing, but also show someone how it works, it's just still just a beautiful surface.
Yeah.
So I think that, in these frustrations, obviously, like in difficult times, it's when you really learn the most. So I think the reason it's well equipped is because, first of all, we come from, design background, and we were there, sourcing materials and everything else originally, and knew the difficulties of falling in love with something and then having it taken away from you. But also, just the hardships of kind of trying to push this through, the process. And through all those lessons, obviously we try to make something as easily as accessible as possible. But I mean, not to say it's not easy, or it is easy, because it's always complex on every project. Like you said, custom in general is like, it's always complicated.
Yeah. Designers, do you have any questions for Geoff? You can use the chat feature now. I will also note, I forgot to even talk about all this. I'm so excited. I feel like we kind of covered it. The answer,
totally. Yeah. I think this is just covers some of the millwork and, other stuff that we discussed earlier.
Sweet. So designers, if you want to chat with Geoff some more or order some samples, you can do that on our website. I will, sorry, I have the wrong title there, but smash that button. Order samples from Pure and Freeform. I will say that I really resonate with you having built a product based on your frustrations as a designer, because I feel like that's what we've done here at Source, is that we really got frustrated with not being able to connect with manufacturers like you doing cool stuff, and we wanted to make that possible. So I really love it. We kind of have a similar mindset of like, let's fix it so that we can use it the way we want to. We do have a question. Where are you headquartered?
So the headquarters is in Minneapolis. That's where, the production. So the production is, in Minneapolis, as well as administration and project management. I'm in LA because I was here. I was actually in New York for a while and then moved out to LA, but we have a design office here. So that's where a lot of the work is. And there's another rep in LA. But yeah, in general, everything is headquartered in Minneapolis.
Great. Yeah, we do a lot of great projects here in Portland.
It speaks to the construction process for me though, because I find, Portland is, first of all, I think there's like amazing designers in the Pacific Northwest in general, but like part of the reason why I think we do very well is because people actually fight for things like red list free or sustainable materials. And also there's a culture of design. So, I mean, you have a lot of installers that want to support, the more beautiful projects over margins. And I just find when you get into some of the larger markets, you're in a position where you're just competing, with massive companies that are, churning out work and don't really think twice about, VEs and substitution. So I think there's definitely a reason for it. I do think, and this is, not saying any area of the US is better than another, but I find, people are a little bit more forward thinking in terms of sustainability and materiality in your area.
Well, and it goes back to with a product like you don't have to sacrifice innovation and beauty for sustainability. That those two things, and price, can all go together. And if you start the conversation from the very beginning of your project, you can make it happen. And so I really appreciate what you guys are doing, especially with that story of like, let's make sustainable design beautiful design, because sometimes it doesn't feel like it.
Totally. And also accessible, because I think, the other thing with sustainable design is sometimes it's so specific that it can be used in, only really a few projects, whereas like metal is used everywhere. It's one of the most versatile material, and therefore, it makes a lot of sense to use it.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks, Geoff. This has been great chatting with you guys, designers. We'll see you later. Anyway, I hope you guys stay great over there. Order some samples from Geoff. This sounds like
and we are shipping. We were shipping through everything. So if anyone wants to see, especially some of the new textures and surfaces, definitely reach out.
I love it. Thanks so much, Geoff.
Cool. Thank you.
We'll see ya. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.